Everybody, in today's video, we're going to be taking an early look at February. We're going to be seeing where it's going to be colder and where it's going to be warmer than normal. Right now, it looks like it's going to be a fairly cold and active month for many areas, especially if you live in the northern half of the United States. It's going to be from coast to coast, really active, and also, again, we're going to have some of those colder temperatures move through. We're going to look at a bunch of different parameters to kind of discuss what's going to be going on, and today will be a bit of a longer video just because there's so much information that I do want to show you guys, and today is going to be more of one of those scientific videos where we go a little bit more in depth, and then probably the next couple of videos we'll go back to the regular storm videos where we talk about upcoming snowstorms and pattern changes over much of the United States. So here's what the current National Weather Service page looks like. We have some winter weather advisories scattered throughout parts of the Rockies with a couple of winter storm warnings in South Dakota. We also have some more winter weather advisories through Wisconsin, Iowa, and Illinois, as well as scattered through the interior Northeast. And then we even have some winter storm warnings in effect for upstate New York in that pink area, and then we have some winter storm watches in northern New Mexico and southern Colorado, especially in those higher elevations. High wind watches are up for northern and also parts of southern California, as well as parts of northern Utah, and then we have some air quality alerts in effect for parts of California and into Oregon there. So here's the current GFS model run, and we're going to play through the 10 millibar height anomalies on the GFS because this is a really good tool to see where that polar vortex is going to set up. The 10 millibar level is about 90 to 105,000 feet up in the atmosphere, so of course you're not going to see whatever's happening that far up in the atmosphere actually translate all the way down to the surface within just a couple of days. It usually takes about 10 to 14 days for whatever's happening up in the upper parts of the atmosphere to translate down to the surface. So for example, we're looking at the current polar vortex for the 17th of January as I'm recording this, and that would most likely be, if you add 10 to 14 days, that would be between the 27th and the 31st of this month. So that's when this sort of pattern on the surface would set up, or something similar to this. So it is going to take a while for this to set up, but it looks like in the next couple of days we're definitely going to turn into a bit of a chillier pattern, and we'll look at those actual temperature anomalies in just a bit. So here would be what it currently looks like. We have one polar vortex down here south of Greenland and another one through western Russia there. And we're looking at mainly both of those polar vortexes actually split just a couple days ago, and now they're actually starting to move away from each other. You're going to see that they're going to try and move back together, and then eventually they will form again, and then try and move down into North America. Usually the polar vortex starts up in Europe, and then it moves across through Asia, and then sometimes it does make its way into North America, and that's what we're going to see this time. It is going to actually make that full loop around and move into North America. There's a couple things that you need to pay attention to. These closed off areas in the blues, that's your polar vortexes. This red area and that orange area, that is your stratospheric warming event, and that's what's going to be pushing all this colder air further into North America. And then we have a ridge over portions of northwestern Canada and parts of Alaska there, where you are dealing with a bit of a ridge of high pressure and some warmer conditions over those areas, but that will change with time. So this would be by right now. Here's by the 20th, and we're looking at this polar vortex definitely moving further closer to North America. We're dealing with a lot more warmer air overtaking much of Europe there, and then we see much of the polar vortex starting to take over the northern Atlantic. And you continue to see that as we move through time, you see that polar vortex shifts back into Asia, and then you're going to see this move further to the south into North America. So here would be by January 26th. Here's by Friday, January 29th, and this is a really good setup if you do like cold and snow in the United States. And overall, this is going to be a fairly cold pattern, not just for the eastern U.S. or just for the western U.S. It's going to be pretty much nationwide colder pattern, especially except if you do live across some of the south central and southwestern states. It looks like you guys might stay in some of those warmer conditions. We have that polar vortex over the western or over the eastern half of North America and through parts of northern Europe there. and it's starting to try and move back into North America. We're dealing with that warming event over Asia that's really pushing all this colder air and that polar vortex further to the south. And then here to be by February 1st, and this is the last frame of this model that I'm going to show you. And you see that eventually it does actually dip down into the United States as we get closer to the first day of February. And so you would feel the effects of this right around the 14th of February or so. But I think the colder air will set in much earlier than that. You will see the coldest temperatures, of course, linger on a little bit longer. So here's another thing that I want to show you guys. This is the GEFS model, and this is the average 850 hectopascals temperature anomalies, and this is just a couple thousand feet up in the atmosphere, and this is showing you your temperature anomalies. I like to use this a little bit more than the 2 meter one, the one on the surface, just because it's not too far up in the atmosphere. It still shows you a general idea of what's happening on the ground, but it doesn't really take into account all of those localities, and those tiny changes really usually don't end up showing up in real life when it actually happens. So this usually tends to be a little bit more consistent and a little bit more accurate, and that's why I use it. So this would be by right now we have some colder air into the eastern U.S. with some warmer air out west. Now we do want to watch out for this little area in central Canada, and you're going to start to see some colder air set up here, and eventually that will expand. Now this would be by the 18th. Here's by the 19th, and you see over Canada and also into the northern U.S. we're getting into much of a colder pattern. This would only be by Tuesday of this week. Here would be by the 20th. Here's by the 21st. We are going to see some ridging potentially into the central U.S., although this is going to be a peculiar pattern because we will have most likely a trough in the west and then also another trough along the east coast. So that will be definitely something to watch out for. It's something that we haven't seen in quite a while, where you actually have warmer air being pushed into the central U.S. and then you're somehow getting some of that colder air to get into both coasts. So we will be into more of an interesting pattern. And if you live over the central U.S., I do still think that you will get a couple of those colder shots, although overall it might be 1 or 2 degrees above normal. Here would be by the 22nd. Here's by the 23rd. And again, you can really tell that the northern half of the country is seeing some of those colder temperatures. And then pretty much you get to the southern half of the country and you're back into some of those warmer temperatures. And that's generally how our pattern is going to set up. Here would be by the 24th. Here's by the 25th. And we can definitely tell that we have that big trough into the western U.S. And usually when you see this, it's not a really good sign for the eastern U.S. But because we really have an active pattern, a fast moving pattern, some of that cold air will spill into the eastern United States. Here's by the 27th, here's by the 28th, and here's by the 29th. So you can now definitely tell that we have some sort of warmer air over the central U.S., colder air throughout the eastern and the western United States. And then again, we have that little bubble of warmer air through the central plains. And then you continue to see that pattern kind of solidify itself. You see some general areas of warmer air, and then you see the cold air kind of replace it. And you can see we have very, very cold air over the western United States and western Canada, but over the eastern United States, we also have some of those colder temperatures, and they're not as cold. They're more regulated, just a few degrees below normal, although it is below normal. It's not above normal, at least. And we're also dealing with, again, generally a warmer pattern for the central U.S., although, again, I do think for some of those Arctic blasts, some of the northern part of the some of the northern plains into the Great Lakes, so those areas could still get in on some of that colder air. And here's another thing that I want to show you guys, and this is something that I'm starting to use and kind of just experimenting with a little bit. So here is kind of your city chart. So this is showing you your high and low temperatures for an individual city, and we're going to go through about 5 or 6 different cities across the U.S. just to give you an idea of what's happening. So I'm going to kind of describe how this graph kind of works. This blue line right here, this is your average over time. So this is the low temperature on the bottom side of your screen, the high temperature on the top side of your screen. So this blue line indicates the average temperature, and the red line indicates the average temperature for your high temperature. And then this area right here is what the forecasted temperature actually is, and that green line is the median or the average of all of those. So you can see that we'll just use the low temperature for this. This is at New York City, and we're currently above normal, and it is going to go below normal, maybe goes above normal for a little bit, but then you see that general trend of just a few degrees below what the average is. Let's look at another city here, and let's look at the let's look at Chicago right now. So this is what Chicago is expecting, and we're looking at your average in that blue line, and it is going below average, then pops up closer to above average, but then it stays generally around neutral, maybe a little bit below average over time. Now let's look at another city. Here's what Atlanta, Georgia is expecting, and this is going to be a little bit more up and down. It looks like you guys are currently below average, but it should turn warmer for the next week or so, and then it goes back below normal. So it's really interesting to look at these and just get a general idea of what could happen. Here's what Denver is expecting, and they might actually be above average for most of this. They're currently above average, and it looks like they'll maybe get close to the neutral line, but they'll go back above normal within just a couple days. And then here's another city on the West Coast. Here's Portland, Oregon, and we're looking at this city staying fairly below normal for much of this time period, and maybe a couple nights even below freezing for some of those areas. So let's look at another parameter here, and this is going to be your teleconnections, because this is actually very important in the upper parts of the atmosphere to figure out what could translate down to the surface. This is the Arctic oscillation, and this is fairly important because this tells us how weak or how strong is the polar vortex. And it's kind of counterintuitive. You would think that a stronger polar vortex means you'll get colder air, and while that is true, what you really want is a weak polar vortex, because that means it's moving all around, and that means that it's not going to stay in place, and you're going to have more visits of general cold air. So the Arctic oscillation was looking like it could maybe make a trend towards positive, but it is going back to the negative area, and it's going to stay fairly negative, maybe 3 standard deviations or even 4 standard deviations below the mean average, and that is going to kind of set the tone for a colder pattern. When you have a weak Arctic oscillation or a negative Arctic oscillation there, you're looking at more of that cold air getting displaced over time. Now, here's another thing that we want to look at, and this is going to be your North Atlantic Oscillation, your NAO, and this was also looking like, if you look at a couple of these past members, it was looking like this could possibly trend towards that positive area, or maybe even just closer to neutral, but it's looking with recent model runs that it will stay closer to at least a standard deviation or two below the mean average. And then let's look at another oscillation here, and this is the PNA, the Pacific North America Oscillation, and this is over the western U.S. And usually, if you live in the eastern United States, you want this to stay positive, because usually that does indicate colder temperatures for the eastern U.S. And warmer temperatures for the west. But in this type of pattern where the west coast is going to be cold, the central part of the country might be a little bit warmer, and the east part of the country and the east coast might be colder, you actually do want this to be a little bit negative, and it's actually going to go fairly negative, 3 or 4 standard deviations potentially below the standard line. And then here would be the EPO, the East Pacific Oscillation, and this one is usually one that fluctuates up and down. Every single storm system really affects this one, so you can see how it's really just a curvy line that keeps on going generally downwards with each different storm that passes, and you want this to be either near neutral or below the mean line, and it looks like it will stay around there, even if it does fluctuate up and down just a little bit every once in a while. So here are your snowfall maps, and this is just a general snowfall map just to show you the average of a few model runs. I believe the GFS Ensemble model, which is what we're looking at right now, has about 21 model members, or actually 31 model members. So it's taking the average of all of those over the next about 16 days and plotting it on this map. And I like to use this more for the chance that you'll see snowfall. So of course, that gray area, you have a lower chance. In the blue area, you have a higher chance of seeing the snowfall within that period. And then in the purple or the pink, that's where you have a fairly good chance, or almost 100% chance, of seeing snowfall within that period. Let's start looking at the European Ensemble model. So this is for the next 10 days, how much snowfall the average is showing. And again, you are seeing quite a bit of snowfall just within the next 10 days through the 24th. And we're looking at potentially 6+ inches for a lot of these areas. And really, the purple is not really showing how much snowfall you're seeing. I'm not really using that graph to see how much snowfall each of these individual areas are seeing. It's more just to see where are the higher chances of seeing snowfall, and you can see that the higher chances are definitely in that purple or darker blue area, or even in those pinks. Now, Here would be that 30-day snowfall, and this is going from now through the 13th of February, and we're looking at a decent area of heavy snowfall potentially, and definitely a good chance of seeing snowfall over the northeastern corner of the United States from Minnesota and Iowa eastward, and then also another area over the west coast where you guys are also looking at, especially in those higher elevations, quite a bit of snowfall. And then here's that 45-day snowfall, and just to give you an idea of what I like to kind of classify these as, in the gray area, I'm thinking right around 0 to 30% chance of seeing snowfall. In the blue area, 30 to 50% chance of seeing snowfall within this time period. In the purple area, 50 to 75% chance, and then 75 to 100% chance in that pink area. And that's kind of how I classify that. And this is more how I use this map. Not really to see exactly how much are you going to see. It's more about what are the chances that you see it. And you can see that definitely a good portion of the country is at least in that purple area, and that's a decent shot of seeing some snowfall right through much of the country, especially again that northern half of the country. Here is so that is going to wrap it up for this video, and I hope you guys do enjoy this type of style. And I think I will start to do more, especially when you get more of these pattern changes and when the surface pattern is a little bit quieter, kind of like what it is right now. There's not too many storms rolling through. So I think probably when we do get into some of these calmer patterns, I'll try and make more of these type of videos. If you did enjoy it, please consider liking the video, subscribing, and turning on notifications, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.